Ethan's answer came without heat. Because she asked. That was all. No defense. No plea. No wound displayed for applause. Just the truth, simple enough to shame the complicated. Caroline felt something rise in her chest, something older than anger and softer than pride. She looked at Ethan's worn cuffs, at Sophie's trembling mouth, at the half-empty syrup bowl between them, and she understood that the poorest thing at that table was not money. It was Preston's imagination. He could not imagine goodness without a hidden invoice. He could not imagine a chair offered without a trap beneath it. Then the diner door opened again, and two photographers stepped inside, shaking snow from their coats. One of them raised a camera. "Miss Whitaker, is this part of tonight's charity event?" Preston straightened immediately, recovering his smile. "Just a brief community moment," he said. "Nothing official." But Sophie slipped from the booth before Ethan could stop her. She stood beside her father, small in her mismatched mittens, eyes bright with tears she refused to drop. "It is official to me," she said. "He feeds people when nobody is taking pictures." The first flash went off, white and sudden. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, not from fear, but from the old tiredness of being seen only when someone needed a story. Caroline stood then, slowly, carefully, with Sophie's drawing pressed against her coat. She did not look at the cameras. She looked at Ethan, and in the hush that followed, she began to wonder whether the person she had crossed the country to find had been sitting in front of her all along. The second camera flash never came, because Ethan lifted one hand, not toward the photographers, not in anger, but in quiet refusal. "Please," he said, "not my daughter." Something in his voice made even the men with cameras lower their hands. Caroline turned toward them with the kind of calm that could quiet a boardroom. "No more pictures." Preston's smile tightened. "Caroline, that is not wise. It is not a request." The photographers stepped back, embarrassed by the softness of her authority. For a few seconds, only the storm spoke, scraping snow along the glass and pushing cold air through. "The old window seams." Sophie wiped her cheek with the back of one mitten, then looked at her father with a fierce little sadness. "They always think you want something," she whispered. Ethan crouched beside her. "People think what they know how to think, but they do not know you. That is all right." "No, it is not." Before he could stop her, Sophie pulled away and ran toward the narrow hallway beside the restrooms, where a back staircase led to the small apartment above the laundromat next door. "Sophie," Ethan called, but she was already gone, her boots thudding up the steps like a tiny heartbeat refusing to be ignored. Mrs. Brooks set down the coffee pot. "She is going for the box," she murmured. Ethan looked at her, and the color left his face. "Evelyn, no." Caroline heard the change in his voice. Not fear exactly. Something deeper. The ache of a man whose private kindness was about to be dragged into public light. Preston noticed it too, and for the first time, his certainty flickered. "What box?" he asked. No one answered. The diner waited. A minute passed, then another. The old clock ticked above the counter. A plow rumbled somewhere down Main Street. Caroline stood beside the booth, Sophie's drawing pressed against her coat, feeling the strange nearness of the past. Then Sophie came back down the hallway carrying a dented blue tin box with painted daisies on the lid. She held it with both arms as if it were heavy, though it could not have weighed more than 3 pounds. Ethan stepped toward her. "Sweetheart, that is not for this." Sophie hugged the box tighter. "Mom said truth is for when lies get too loud." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, Caroline saw grief there, and love, and surrender. Sophie placed the box on the table. The metal made a small hollow sound against the worn surface. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were folded receipts, old envelopes, church bulletins, and copies of letters wrapped in a faded ribbon. At the very top was a photograph clipped from a newspaper, yellowed at the edges. Caroline's breath caught. She knew that photograph. A thin 12-year-old girl with thick glasses, standing outside St. Agnes Children's Home after surgery, smiling like hope was something she had just been handed and did not yet trust. Caroline reached toward it, then stopped, as if touching it might break the years between then and now. Ethan spoke softly. "Sophie, put it away." "No," she said, crying now. "He said you wanted money. He said you were pretending. You do not pretend." Preston leaned in, his voice losing its polish. "What is all this?" Mrs. Brooks answered from behind the counter, her eyes wet. "It is what he never wanted anyone to see." Caroline picked up one of the letters. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded, but the handwriting moved through her like a song remembered in a dark room. You are not alone. Keep reading. The world will need what you see. At the bottom were 2 initials. E.M. Her hands began to shake. She opened another receipt. The donor line said Ethan Miller. The amount was $27.43. The date was from the winter she had almost dropped out of school because she could not afford new lenses. Caroline looked at Ethan. He looked away, not ashamed of giving, but humbled by being found. It was you, she whispered. Ethan's voice was barely louder than the snow tapping the windows. It was never supposed to be about me. The room went completely still. Even Preston did not speak. Caroline held the letter to her chest, and the billionaire who owned towers, companies, and headlines stood in a small-town diner with tears in her eyes, staring at the poor single father who had been carrying her future in a blue tin box for years. Caroline did not say another word in the diner after that. She simply folded the old letter with hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts without shaking, placed it carefully inside her coat, and looked at Ethan as if the room had rearranged itself around him. The gala starts in 30 minutes, Preston said, trying to recover the evening like a man gathering papers after a windstorm. We can discuss this later, privately, with legal review. Caroline turned toward him. No, one small word. Quiet. Final. Ethan stood beside the booth, one hand resting on Sophie's shoulder. Caroline, you do not owe me anything. She looked at him then, and the softness in her eyes carried years of unanswered prayers. That is where you are wrong, she said. I owe the truth. 27 minutes later, the ballroom of the Whitaker Learning Initiative glowed with chandeliers, white tablecloths, silver forks, and the gentle music of a string quartet near the stage. Outside the hotel windows, snow kept falling over Maple Falls, but inside, everything was warm, polished, and expensive. Donors in dark suits spoke softly beside local officials. Reporters adjusted microphones. A banner behind the podium read, "Every child deserves a future." Preston moved quickly through the room, whispering to staff, changing cards, removing one chair from the front row and adding another near the back. He had built the evening around a clean story. Caroline Whitaker, visionary billionaire, returns to rural America to expand access to education. It was inspiring. It was useful. It was safe. Then Caroline walked in with Ethan Miller and Sophie at her side, and the room lost its script. People turned. Conversations thinned. Preston hurried over, his smile tight enough to crack. Caroline, I placed Mr. Miller at a side table. The optics of walking in together are complicated. Ethan immediately stepped back. I can wait outside. Sophie grabbed his sleeve. Caroline did not raise her voice. He walks with me. This is not strategic. It is honest. That ended it. The quartet finished its song, applause rose politely, and Caroline stepped onto the stage. For a moment, she stood behind the podium beneath warm lights, looking out at people who had come expecting inspiration without discomfort, charity without confession, generosity without humility. Preston stood near the curtain, holding the prepared speech on a tablet. Caroline looked at the first line, then turned the tablet face down. A murmur passed through the ballroom. When I was 12 years old, she began, I could barely see the words on a classroom board. The room quieted. I lived in a children's home with a roof that leaked in March and radiators that knocked all night. I had no family with savings, no powerful last name, and no reason to believe the world was waiting for me. Ethan lowered his eyes. Sophie leaned against him. Caroline continued, her voice steady but full. Then someone I did not know began sending money. Not much by the standards of this room. $40, $18, once $27.43. But those gifts paid for lenses, books, bus fare, application fees, and one surgery that changed the way I saw the world. A reporter slowly lowered his pen. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Preston's face went pale. Caroline took the old letter from her coat and held it up. With every gift came a note. You are not alone. Keep reading. The world will need what you see. For 22 years, I searched for the person who wrote those words. She looked toward the back of the room, where Ethan stood in his worn jacket, trying to disappear beside a velvet curtain. Tonight, I found him. The room followed her gaze. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the single father who had been mocked in a diner less than an hour earlier. Ethan did not move. He did not smile. He did not claim the moment. He only placed one hand over Sophie's, as if reminding himself that fame was just another kind of weather, and a good man did not have to step into every storm. Caroline's voice softened. His name is Ethan Miller. He is not a brand story. He is not a symbol for our campaign. He is the reason I am standing here. And for the first time that night, the ballroom was not impressed. It was silent. The silence in the ballroom lasted longer than applause would have. It moved from table to table, across crystal glasses and folded programs, across men who had donated millions and never missed a chance to have their names engraved on walls, across women who suddenly looked at Ethan Miller as if they had nearly stepped past a cathedral without noticing it. Ethan stood near the velvet curtain with Sophie pressed close to his side, his eyes lowered, his shoulders still carrying the shape of a man more comfortable giving than being praised. Caroline stepped away from the podium. Preston moved quickly, blocking her path with a whisper sharpened by panic. Do not do this. Thank him. Give him a plaque. Let the room clap and move on. Caroline looked at him. Move on from what? From embarrassment. Whose embarrassment? Preston glanced toward Ethan, then toward the donors. A billionaire does not build authority by kneeling in front of a diner cook. Caroline's face changed, not with rage, but with disappointment so deep it made rage unnecessary. No, she said softly. A human being builds character by knowing when she should. She walked past him. The microphone picked up the faint sound of her heels against the polished floor as she left the stage, crossed the center aisle, and moved toward the back of the ballroom. Every head turned with her. No one coughed. No one whispered. Even the quartet sat motionless, bows resting in their laps. Ethan saw her coming and shook his head slightly, almost pleading. Caroline, he said when she reached him, please do not make me into something I am not. She stopped in front of him, close enough that only the first rows could hear clearly, though the microphone still carried pieces of every word. What are you not? Important. Sophie looked up sharply. Caroline's eyes filled again, but her voice stayed steady. Ethan, you gave when no one would know. You believed in a child who could give you nothing back. You helped me see before the world ever looked at me. If that is not important, then this room has misunderstood the word. Ethan swallowed, his hand tightening around Sophie's. I had help too, he said. My wife believed in that fund before I did. I just kept mailing envelopes after she was gone because it felt like keeping a promise. The room softened at that. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small inward breath from hundreds of people realizing that the greatest gifts sometimes come from people already grieving. Caroline looked at Sophie then. Your mother must have been extraordinary. Sophie nodded, tears shining but not falling. Dad says she still teaches us, just quieter now. Caroline pressed one hand to her heart. Then, with every camera lowered and every powerful person watching, she turned to the empty chair beside Ethan near the back wall. It was not a reserved seat. It had no name card, no ribbon, no view of the stage. It was just a chair placed where people put those they did not know how to honor. Caroline touched the back of it and asked in a voice smaller than the room expected, Can I sit with you? Ethan stared at her, and for one breath, the years between them seemed to gather in the space around that chair. The church basement, the old letters, the diner pancakes, the blue tin box, the snow, the shame, the grace. Then Ethan gave the faintest smile. You already did. Caroline sat down beside him, not on the stage, not beneath her name, not under the banner of her own foundation, but in the back row with a single father and his daughter. No one clapped at first. They could not. Some moments asked for hands. This one asked for humility. Preston stood near the stage with the tablet still glowing in his palm, the prepared speech useless now. His face had lost its polish. Across the ballroom, donors lowered their eyes, and a few quietly removed the gold pledge cards from their jackets, not because they wanted recognition, but because recognition suddenly seemed too small a reason to give. Sophie reached across Ethan and placed her mismatched mitten into Caroline's hand. Caroline held it like a promise. And only then did the applause begin, slow, uneven, almost embarrassed, until it rose not for wealth, not for branding, not for a perfect campaign, but for the quiet dignity of a man who had changed a life from the shadows and never once asked the world to turn on a light. By the end of that night, Caroline Whitaker did something no one in the ballroom expected. She returned to the stage, not to reclaim the spotlight, but to give it away. Ethan stood beside Sophie near the back wall, still uncomfortable with applause, still looking as though he would rather be fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the diner than hearing his name spoken beneath chandeliers. Caroline placed both hands on the podium and looked out at the room with a different kind of strength now, quieter and cleaner. "Tonight was supposed to be about my foundation," she said. "But I think we have been building the wrong kind of monument." The room listened. Preston stood near the curtain, silent, the tablet hanging useless at his side. "We put names on buildings," Caroline continued. "We put faces on campaigns. We put donors in the front row. But the person who changed my life never wanted a front row. He wanted a child to have glasses, a book, a bus ticket, a reason to keep going." She turned toward Ethan. "So from this night forward, this initiative will carry the spirit of what he and his wife began." 3 months later, the old brick schoolhouse on Maple Street reopened as the Miller Light Center, named not to glorify Ethan, but to honor the light his family had kept passing from hand to hand. It offered tutoring, eye exams, winter coats, meals after school, art classes, and quiet rooms where children could read without being rushed or judged. On the first day, Ethan arrived before sunrise to help Mrs. Brooks set up folding chairs. He still wore his same jacket. He still drove the old blue pickup. When a reporter asked why he had not moved into the large house Caroline had offered to buy him, Ethan only smiled and said, "A bigger house does not make a man bigger, but a bigger table can feed more people." Caroline did not try to rescue him from his life. She respected it. She funded the center, protected his privacy, and kept showing up at Miller's Corner Diner every Thursday evening, always sitting in the last booth, always asking Sophie what she had drawn that week. Over time, the town stopped whispering about the billionaire and the diner cook. They began noticing something better: the way Caroline laughed more easily, the way Sophie saved her a seat without asking, the way Ethan's grief slowly made room for grace. Nothing rushed, nothing loud, just respect becoming friendship, friendship becoming trust, and trust becoming the kind of love that does not erase the past, but sits beside it gently. Years later, visitors to the Miller Light Center would pause at a small framed note near the entrance. It was written in Ethan's careful hand. "Some people do not change the world by standing above it. They change it by saving one seat." And beneath it, in Sophie's handwriting, were 3 smaller words: "Sit with us." Because dignity does not need to shout. Grace does not need applause. And kindness, when given quietly, never truly disappears. It travels through the dark, through years, through strangers, through children, through storms, until one day it returns as a miracle and pulls out a chair. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments what kindness you still remember, or who once saved a seat for you when you felt alone. Thank you for watching until the end.